The Latin Kings, one of the largest and oldest Hispanic street gangs in the United States, have a complex and deeply rooted history involving political, cultural, and criminal dimensions. Here's a detailed overview. Origins and founded. The Latin Kings were established in the 1940s in Chicago, Illinois. Founders. The gang was initially formed by Puerto Rican immigrants who faced discrimination, poverty, and violence from other ethnic groups and the police. Original purpose. The Kauai group began as a self-defense and community organization, aiming to protect Hispanic youth and provide cultural unity and empowerment. Ideology and structure philosophy. The Latin Kings adopted an identity centered around Hispanic pride, social justice, and resistance to oppression. Over time, this ideology fused with gang culture and criminal enterprise. Symbols: crown with 5 points, symbolizes the gang's association with the People-Nation Alliance, opposed to the Folk Nation. Colors: black and gold, lion and sun imagery, are also common. Religious influence. The gang developed a quasi-religious code of conduct and uses terminology like kingism to express loyalty and lifestyle. Organizational structure. Highly organized and hierarchical, led by an Inca leader. Second in command is a cacique, and ranks follow. Chapters, known as tribes, existing in various cities and prisons. Constitution and manifesto, known as the King Manifesto, which outlines rules, ideology, discipline, and mission. Expansion. 1970s, 1980s. The Latin Kings expanded heavily due to increased incarceration rates. Prisons became crucial in the gang's growth and control. 90s. The gang had a strong presence in cities like New York, Chicago, and other urban centers across the U.S. In New York, a Dominican faction emerged and grew in influence. By this time, chapters were operating in Latin America as well, particularly in Mexico, Ecuador, and Spain. Criminal activities. While the Latin Kings maintained a facade of cultural pride, over time many chapters turned heavily to crime. Primary criminal enterprises include drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, extortion, robbery, murder, and assault. The gang often controls neighborhoods and prisons through intimidation and violence. Law enforcement crackdowns 1990s, 2000s. Major law enforcement operations targeted the gang. Operation Crown, Chicago 1997. Dozens of members arrested, including leaders. Thousands 2010s. Multiple federal RICO indictments across the U.S. 2020s. Ongoing surveillance and prosecution efforts continue to weaken the gang structure, but it remains active. Latin Kings in prisons are central to the gang structure. Leadership often resides behind bars and communicates with outside members. They often recruit members while incarcerated, creating a powerful prison network. Modern status. Still active. The Latin Kings remain one of the most structured and influential gangs in the U.S. and parts of Latin America. Splintering. Internal divisions, law enforcement pressure, and ideological differences have led to splits in leadership and operations. Attempts at legitimacy. Some factions have attempted to rebrand as political or social justice organizations, but authorities remain skeptical. Cultural impact. The Latin Kings have been referenced in music, film, and literature. Some former members have become activists, writers, or consultants, speaking against gang violence and helping with reform programs. Here's a deeper continuation, focusing on notable leaders, expansion outside the U.S., internal conflicts, and reform efforts. Notable leaders: Luis Felipe, King Blood, New York chapter. Background: founded the New York chapter of the Latin Kings in the 1980s, after moving from Chicago to the Bronx. Leadership: ran the gang with an iron grip even from prison. Communicated through coded letters. Crimes: ordered multiple murders from behind bars. Conviction: in 1997, Felipe was convicted on RICO charges and sentenced to life in solitary confinement at the Florence ADX Supermax prison. His conviction became a turning point in how federal agencies handled gang leaders operating from prison. Antonio Fernandez, King Tone, reform leader, role, became Inca, leader of the New York Latin Kings in the late 1990s. Vision tried to transform the Latin Kings into a community movement focused on empowerment and anti-violence. Public relations, spoke at schools and public forums, was featured in the HBO documentary Latin Kings: A Street Gang Story. Fall from Grace was arrested in 1999 for selling heroin and sentenced to 13 years in prison, damaging his credibility but still respected by some. Expansion outside the U.S., the Latin Kings have expanded internationally, particularly in Latin America and Europe. Spain. The Latin Kings were officially recognized as a cultural organization in Catalonia in the 2000s after pledging nonviolence. Authorities attempted to integrate the group into civil society, but violence still erupted between rival gangs like the Nietas. Ecuador became a major force in cities like Quito and Guayaquil, known for conflicts with rival gangs and entanglement with drug trafficking. Government has occasionally used both repression and dialogue with them. Mexico and Central America, not as powerful as MS-13 or Barrio 18, but present in some areas, mainly connected through prison networks and transnational drug operations, internal conflicts and splits factionalism. The Latin Kings have often suffered from infighting, especially between Chicago and New York factions pro-reform. Versus pro-crime members' leadership power struggles have led to violence even within the gang. Excommunications. Members who break the code or challenge leadership may face violence or expulsion, sometimes termed as being put on a green light, hit list. Reform and outreach. Despite their criminal reputation, some Latin King members and former leaders have pushed for reform, community outreach. Certain factions organize food drives, cultural events, and youth mentoring, gang exit programs. Some members join initiatives helping people leave gang life behind, often at great personal risk. Political influence. In rare cases, Latin Kings have engaged in protests or aligned with social movements, symbols and codes. Further detail. Pointed crown. Each point represents a value, often love, respect, sacrifice, honor, and obedience. Hand signs. Complex hand gestures signify allegiance and rank. Written codes. Communications use a mix of Spanish and English with symbolism. Oaths. New members must take a sacred oath known as Oath of Kingship, law enforcement and surveillance. The FBI, DEA, and local police regularly monitor Latin Kings' activities, especially through wiretaps, undercover informants, RICO prosecutions, targeting criminal enterprises systematically. Challenges. Despite arrests, decentralized leadership allows the gang to regenerate. Present day, 2020-2025. Still active, particularly in Chicago, New York, Connecticut. New Jersey, U.S. prisons. Latin American cities' drug trafficking and violent enforcement remain core activities. Many chapters are involved in local power struggles, often allying with or fighting against other gangs. Let's continue with a detailed look at the Latin King Manifesto and Code, followed by a timeline of major events, and then a brief analysis of their present-day role and influence. Latin King Manifesto and Code of Conduct. The Latin King Manifesto, sometimes called the Manifesto of the Almighty Latin King and Queen Nation, ALKQN, is a central document that outlines the gang's ideology, structure, laws, and goals. Core concepts. Kingism, a philosophical system blending nationhood, spirituality, brotherhood, and revolutionary ideals. Emphasizes upliftment of Latino people, resistance to oppression, and self-respect, sometimes interpreted almost as a religion or belief system within the gang. The 5 points of the crown represent the key principles: love, respect, honor, sacrifice, obedience. Sacred oath. New recruits swear to uphold the laws of the nation. Breaking the code results in disciplinary actions. ranging from suspension to termination, which can mean beatings or death. Rank and leadership structure: Inca, chapter leader; cacique, second in command, enforcer, ensures discipline is upheld. Warlord, handles defense and retaliation. Lower ranks: soldiers and probates, probationary members. Discipline, enforced through physical beatings called violations. Members must attend meetings, pay dues, and obey orders. Language, uses codes, symbols, and ritual language, often combining Spanish and English. Common terms include amor de rey, love of the king; BK, bloodline king; and 360 deg, symbolizing full loyalty and understanding. Timeline of major events: 1940s, 1960s, founding and local growth 1940s, Latin kings form in Chicago, mainly Puerto Rican youth, 1950s, 60s, expand in Chicago jails and neighborhoods, becoming one of the strongest Hispanic street organizations. 70s, 1980s, street gang identity, adopt the 5-point crown and formal structure, engage in turf wars, and begin drug trafficking operations. First appearance of Latin kings in New York, forming a separate but related branch. 90s, height of power and crackdowns: Luis Felipe, King Blood, leads NYC chapter, orders killings while in prison. 97, Felipe sentenced to life in solitary. Antonio Fernandez, King Tone, becomes Inca of NYC, tries to reform the group. 2000s, global spread and controversy. Latin kings expand into Spain, Ecuador, Mexico, and Italy. Some governments try to integrate them as cultural groups. Others crack down on violence. FBI launches multiple RICO cases in Chicago, Connecticut, Florida. 2010s, 2020s, fragmentation and surveillance. Numerous raids and internal betrayals weaken centralized control. Kings remain powerful in prisons, with sporadic street influence, continued involvement in drug trade, sometimes aligned with Mexican cartels.